Hi guys, my name is Nadishda.
Hello, my name is Hassan.
I'm Marin.
You can cut it.
Okay, so we chose for our ENG6 project, we chose to do a dice game. And so the dice game we choose to do was Farkle. And so Farkle is currently a 2-player game, and it consists of each player taking turns rolling 6 dice. And the point of the game is once you roll the 6 dice, you can create certain number combinations to accumulate a certain number of points. But you can only bank a certain number of dice at a point, and if you choose to re-roll those dice, you can get higher points, or you can get dice with no point options, and this is called a Farkle. And the point of the game is each person will take turns going back and forth rolling the dice and accumulating score until one person reaches 5,000, and the person who reaches a score of 5,000 is the winner.
Some of the features that we've implemented into our online game include a graphical user interface. We've included animations of the dice rolling and the dice moving between the players. We've also added the numbers update within the player scores. We've also added sound effects for when the player starts the game, when the player clicks roll on the dice. When they add the dice, there's a whoosh sound effect. We've also added a few jingles here and there. And then to build a little bit more on our multiplayer behind the game, we have a channel in ThinkSpeak that contains all of our data. We have 4 fields where the player number is written, the scores of the players, and an array that contains the dice.
Yeah. Okay. And so for complications, there were a lot of them. We had, I think the first issue that I ran into is I originally was making the scoring code and I had a lot of trouble doing that. I was originally trying to do it with basically entirely with conditional statements, and it was like 1,400 lines of code. And they ended up making a better version that was only like 70 lines using an internal function called hiscounts that I had been unaware of when I made my version. So that was the first big issue. And then other than that, I think the main issue we've run into was using ThinkSpeak. We were having trouble with making sure that everything reads and writes correctly and implements all of the buttons turning on and off that we needed to in between the players. And I think we got it pretty good, but it was definitely a very difficult part of making this game. Okay, so now we're going to do a walkthrough of how to play the game, and the computer on the left will be player 1 and the computer on the right will be player 2. So clicking the begin button, you can hear the start sound. And then player 2, once you choose that on the radio button, there's an animation loading for player 1 to make their decisions, and you also have grayed out the rolled dice area, the roll dice button, and the bank score button, so that player 2 can't affect the game state while it's player 1's turn. And then going to player 1, when you press roll dice, you can hear the dice rolling sound, and then now they have access to the rolled dice area as well as the bank score button. And then when you go to player 2, they have player 1's information, and now ThinkSpeak has sent them the score and that it's their turn. So they can now press roll dice. They hear the sound, and now the dice goes to their area. Rolling dice again, because you are allowed to do that. Choose more dice, and you can hear that sound. Their score adds. And now player 1 is their turn. Continuing on the left, you can see the scoring guide, which tells you which dice combinations you're able to use to get points. And then so now it's player 2's last turn, and it looks like they're about to win if they can get 50 points, and they will because they have more than enough here. So they'll get a U wins symbol.
Okay, now we'll talk a little bit about the code behind the scenes and how Farkle actually runs and how the data is stored and how the game actually functions through the program and everything like that. So initially, under the properties menu, this is where we store all the variables that actually stores the data for Farkle. This is the player's values, all the player's score, all the arrays, and all the data that we need essentially to just run the Farkle. And then this is essentially the global variables that we'll be calling later in our program using app dot. This is the class and all the global variables. As we scroll down, we'll continue to see the functions that we use that we define that we want to call later in our program, such as the reading and writing data section, as well as Marin can talk a little bit about how the visuals are updated in the program.
Okay, so then right here we see that you see the dice roll gif.gif is what I call it, the image that I created using all 6 of our dice images. I took them and made them into a gif that just basically rotates through each one so that you can see the spinning dice. Yeah, that's about it for that bit.
And then this while loop that we have right here, this kind of helps the person who's waiting for the other person. This constantly keeps the data updated and make sure that any move that the other player makes is sent to the player who's waiting. That way they have the most up-to-date data and information. And then once again, the graphic is updated with this new information that they receive. And then
and then specifically when we go to see the image source for rolled slots, those are updated using the rolled dice array, which is a random array 1 by 6 from 1 to 6, and using this string and concatenation, you can see how that essentially
puts it like sorry, it basically just associates each rolled slot image with the correlating dice array, like
with a numerical value.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's assigning that image to the numerical value.
And then in order to show that we are switching from the person who's waiting to the active player, we then set the player who sent the message to the ThinkSpeak data from the channel. That way it updates the player number from 1 to 2, updating the person who gets to make the action.
And the second part of that data table is the player number who sent the last message.
And then look, right here we have a little bit of checks for ourselves in the command window to make sure that all the data is sending properly and then used for debugging purposes. And then continuing with the functions, we have we make sure to clear the ThinkSpeak channel before we actually run the program. That way, if we played this program the previous time, there's no data that's going to mess up the data when we run it a new time. And then we continue updating the player numbers, making sure all the arrays and all the displays are properly fitted, and that the data is written and read from the ThinkSpeak channel. This right here specifically gets the values for player 1 and player 2. And then the setup of the send data to the other player is a big function that we use in this program that actually makes sure that every time that the player presses bank score, it makes sure to send that banked score value to the other player. That way it updates on their screen.
And so there's a lot of crucial elements that we have to include as like startup functions. And so one of those includes setting our dice array equal to all zeros. So each player is starting with an all zero array. So meaning no points, no scores, no values, no data yet. And so in addition to that, for our interface, for visual purposes, we have to import images. And so in our rolled slots and our banked slots and rolled slots for player 1 and 2, we did have to import images and import the white squares. And so those are set as initial startup functions. And then we also in our startup function define our ThinkSpeak keys. And then if we go down a little more, we'll see that these ThinkSpeak keys are defined. And if one of you wants to talk about the app clear speak channel, you can.
Yeah, that's basically what we saw just above is clearing the ThinkSpeak channel, because whoever is player 2, immediately when the app begins, they start running wait for the other player. And if that sees a number that is, if they see number 1 as the last person to have sent something in the ThinkSpeak channel, that will tell them to take their turn. So clearing the ThinkSpeak channel at the beginning of the initialization of the app means that will show 0, and that will not tell player 2 that it's their turn.
And then we have the rolled dice button. So essentially what this does is it takes our initial images on the rolled dice that are 0, and when we click it, it just generates random images for that.
And then once again, the guess populate, that's the animation that we see at the start of the program that's run.
And then here is, let's see, the Farkle code is basically, Farkle check basically runs to see if any of the dice do not have if there's no combinations of dice that can get points. And when this happens, it will take the player whose turn it is, and it will switch the turn automatically. They won't have to press bank score, and it will remove any points that have been given to them by previous rolls of that turn, and just switch it immediately to the other player. And you can see that every time a dice is clicked, that visibility is turned off every time you click one of those rolled slots. So Farkle dice, which checks only the dice currently that you're rolling. So if you take 2 dice out of the array, it only checks the rest of them because the visibility will be off, meaning that it will remove it from Farkle dice. And then it will check all of those, and once it gets to the bottom, it'll say if Farkle dice is 0, it will run certain aspects, and then if not, it will just continue until you press bank score.
And then right here we can see some of the scoring methods, like the system that we use. We use a similar algorithm to check the Farkle scoring that we did to actually assign the scoring value to the player. We'll go a little bit more into that once we get there, but just wanted to touch up on that. And then
this is basically just a lot of the functions that happen when we press the bank score button. This uses some of them, but as bank score button push actually also initiates the roll dice button push function, it messed up the Farkle, so we ended up having to put some of them individually instead of being able to call bank score button push function by itself.
And so a lot of our next code is extremely repetitive because we have to do it for slots 1 through 6, but the code is exactly the same. It's just a change number. So for example, for rolled slot 1, our image visibility is initially off. And then once a player plays, it populates with an image, and that image is correlated to the numerical array that's needed for the game, and it's put into a string. And so we'll see that for rolled slot image 1, rolled slot image 2, rolled slot image 3, and all the way down to 6.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So now we reach the bank score button push function. So what happens when you press the bank score button is it makes that sound that you heard, the happy sound, I guess, that for when you bank your score, because hopefully your points are going up. And then it'll reset the dice in the rolled slot to all be visible, because some of them have been checked invisible when you click on them to bank them to your score. And then it'll also take all the banked dice, whether in bank slot 1 or 2, depending on which player's turn it is. They'll take that and they will make those invisible. And then it will basically say, like, if you are player 1, it'll take app.score, which is our temporary score array, and initializes that to 0 before we go through actually adding points, because we want to make sure that is 0 from the beginning of the round. And then it will add those as we go through below into the scoring function, which is on we'll get into. It will add app.score, which is our temporary array, to player score value, depending on which player it is, and that is the permanent score that gets sent between the 2 players.
So the main way that the scoring function actually works is by using the histcount function. This function we actually used, Mary brought up earlier. We used this to replace the 1400 lines of code that we previously had for the scoring. This pretty much makes it so that the 1/6 array of the dice, it pretty much checks that array and sees how many of each number are in there. So if there's a 1/6 array that has 1 1 1 6 6 6, it'll say, okay, there's 3 1s and 3 6s. So using this, it makes our if else statements and just checking the scoring a lot easier. We can just check, okay, if there's 3 of any one dice, then the player gets this score. If there's 1 of any dice, then that person has essentially a straight, and then they get this score. So we pretty much just go through every single possible combination that they can go through using the hist count, and then checking how many of a certain dice they need to get that score. And then using this, we loop through all the different possible scoring options they can get, and then add that to either player 1 or player 2, depending on whose turn it is. Down here, we can see the same exact code, but just for player 2.
But also indicated in our code here, if we go up right there, we see that if the player's score value exceeds a certain number or threshold, in our case, we chose 5,000 points to be the winning number. If the accumulated points for that player exceeds that 5,000, then they automatically get claimed as the winner, and we get that pop-up image display of you win.
As you can tell, the scoring code kind of counts for the bulk of our program. And then down here, we kind of have that reading and writing data again. You can see that we call the send data to the other player, and then that player who sent the data is now waiting for the other player to send them the data.
This button push tab is just the opening sound clip we have. It's just a little visual we like to add to enhance our code.
And then down here is the radio button to select which player you are. This allows the game to know basically what player you are, because it'll have a different beginning function if you're player 1 or player 2, and that way you know who's sending information in the ThinkSpeak channel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.